Welcome back to another quiet journey through the shadows of Fazbear Entertainment. Tonight, we're settling into the complete story of the Afton family, a bloodline that stands at the very heart of Five Nights at Freddy's twisted history. This is a family bound not by love or warmth, but by secrets buried in metal casings, by choices that echoed through decades of suffering, and by a father whose ambitions consumed everything they touched. From a business partnership that promised joy and entertainment to a legacy stained with the blood of innocence, the Aftons became something far darker than a simple family unit. They became the architects of their own destruction, players in a tragedy that would haunt pizzeria after pizzeria, ensnaring not just themselves, but countless children in a web of possession and eternal unrest. This is not a story of heroes. There are no clear victories here, no moments where everything resolves into peaceful closure. Instead, this is an examination of how one man's descent into madness pulled his entire family down with him, how neglect festered into tragedy, how a brother's cruelty led to irreversible horror, and how a daughter's innocent curiosity became her doom. We'll trace each member of this infamous family through their lives and their deaths, through their mistakes and their attempts at redemption, through the moments that defined them and the animatronic shells that would eventually house their very souls. Whether you're here to understand the foundation of Five Nights at Freddy's lore, to piece together how this family connects to every major event in the franchise, or simply to let these dark details wash over you as you drift towards sleep, this comprehensive examination will leave no stone unturned. We'll explore William Afton's transformation from businessman to serial killer, the mysterious woman who bore his children and then vanished from the narrative, Michael's journey from tormentor to reluctant hero, Elizabeth's tragic fate at the hands of her father's creation, and the unnamed youngest son, whose birthday party became the stuff of nightmares. Before we descend into this family's shadowed halls, feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoy these deep explorations into FNAF's darkest corners. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and what drew you to learn about the Afton family specifically. It's always fascinating to see how this twisted tale reaches across the world, finding audiences in every time zone, all of us drawn to understand how a family could become so thoroughly intertwined with such horror. Let's begin our journey through the Afton family tree, branch by cursed branch, and discover how one family's dysfunction became the cornerstone of an entire franchise's mythology. William Afton, the architect of tragedy. At the diseased root of the Afton family tree stands William Afton himself, a man whose very name has become synonymous with evil within the Five Nights at Freddy's universe. Born presumably in Utah sometime between the 1930s and 1950s, William would grow to become one of the most complex and thoroughly irredeemable villains in horror gaming history. His story is not one of a man corrupted by circumstance or driven to darkness by tragedy. Rather, William Afton represents something more chilling, a man whose innate cruelty and obsession with immortality led him down a path that would destroy not only his own family, but countless innocent lives across multiple decades. William Afton's entrance into the world of animatronic entertainment came through his partnership with Henry Emily, a robotics expert whose genuine love for creating joy through mechanical marvels stood in stark contrast to William's more mercenary motivations. Together, these two men co-founded Fazbear Entertainment in the 1970s, establishing what would become an empire of family entertainment venues. While Henry focused on the technical brilliance of their creations, bringing to life animatronic performers that could walk, talk, and entertain autonomously. William handled the business side of operations through his company, Afton Robotics. This partnership birthed Fredbear's Family Diner, featuring the iconic spring-lock suits of Fredbear and Spring Bonnie, animatronics that could function independently or be worn by human performers through an innovative but dangerously flawed mechanism. The spring-lock technology, while revolutionary, carried within it the seeds of future horrors. These suits allowed employees to wear them by compressing the internal animatronic components, creating space for a human body. However, the locks were temperamental and prone to failure if exposed to moisture or sudden movements. When they failed, the compressed parts would snap back into place with lethal force, effectively turning the suit into an Iron Maiden that would impale and crush anyone unfortunate enough to be wearing it. This technology, William's innovation, perfectly embodied his approach to creation. Impressive on the surface, deadly in practice, with human safety always a secondary concern to functionality and profit. But William Afton was never content to be merely a businessman and inventor. Somewhere in his psyche lurked something far darker, a fascination with death and remnant that would eventually consume him entirely. The exact moment when William transitioned from negligent father and shrewd businessman to active serial killer remains somewhat ambiguous in the timeline. But his first confirmed murder came in 1983 when he killed Charlotte Emily, Henry's daughter, outside Fredbear's Family Diner. This wasn't a crime of passion or an accident. William deliberately waited for the young girl to be locked outside in the rain, then struck with calculated precision, ending her life and leaving her body in the alley where the rain fell like tears. This murder proved transformative for William, though not in any redemptive sense. When Charlotte's spirit possessed the security puppet, the animatronic designed by her father to protect her, William discovered something that would become his obsession: remnant. This substance, a supernatural amalgam of metal infused with human soul and memory, could apparently grant a form of immortality by binding consciousness to inanimate objects. For a man seemingly terrified of his own mortality, this discovery became an all-consuming goal. If children's souls could inhabit animatronics, if death itself could be circumvented through possession, then William Afton would pursue this power regardless of the cost. His pursuit led to the creation of Circus Baby's Pizza World, a facility that served as a front for something far more sinister. William didn't just design these fun-time animatronics to entertain. He engineered them specifically to abduct and kill children, each one equipped with mechanisms to lure victims close and store their bodies within their mechanical frames. Circus Baby herself featured a claw within her stomach that could grab a child offering them ice cream, pulling them inside where they would die. Ballora had auditory sensors to detect hidden crying. Funtime Freddy came with his hand puppet Bon Bon for distraction, while Funtime Foxy possessed agility and voice mimicry capabilities. These weren't entertainment robots. They were killing machines disguised as party performers, allowing William to rent them out for children's events, where they could do their grim work under the guise of celebration. The 1985 missing children incident at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza stands as William's most infamous crime spree. Donning the Spring Bonnie suit, a yellow costume that children recognized as friendly and safe, William lured at least 5 children into the safe room, a space hidden from security cameras and animatronic programming. The methods varied. To Susie, he spun a tale about her lost dog waiting alive in the back. To others, he built trust through games and promises. Most sources identify 5 victims: Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy, though some evidence in later games has led to debate about a possible sixth victim, whose identity remains unclear. William stuffed their bodies into the animatronic suits. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and the ethereal Golden Freddy, where they would remain hidden as the restaurant continued operations. The stench of decay, the blood seeping from the suits, the odd behaviors as the children's spirits awakened within their metal prisons. All of this eventually forced the location to close, but William had already moved on. He had learned what he needed to know about possession, about remnant, about how to potentially achieve the immortality he so desperately craved. William Afton's physical appearance has never been definitively shown in the games, appearing only as a purple sprite in minigames, a shadowy figure whose exact features remain deliberately obscured. From the novel trilogy, we get descriptions of a thin man, whose clothes seem too large for his frame, someone who had once been heavier but lost weight over the years. He bore scars on his neck and back from a near-death spring-lock failure, though whether these scars exist in the game timeline remains unconfirmed. What's consistent across all versions is his association with the color purple, his constant smile during his killings, and his complete lack of remorse for his actions. As a father, William Afton was comprehensively absent and emotionally neglectful, if not outright abusive. He allowed his eldest son, Michael, to relentlessly torment his youngest son, never intervening even when it was clear the younger boy lived in constant terror. He monitored his youngest through Fredbear plushies equipped with cameras and speakers, surveillance disguised as comfort, using them to whisper warnings and advice, but never actually providing the protection a father should offer. When his daughter Elizabeth expressed fascination with Circus Baby, an animatronic he knew was designed to kill, his solution was simply to tell her to stay away, rather than ensuring the dangerous machine was secured or dismantled. He built an empire on the backs of murdered children, while his own children suffered from his neglect, creating a family environment so toxic that tragedy became inevitable. William's relationship with his wife remains one of the franchise's mysteries, but the evidence we do have suggests divorce, custody battles, and potential manipulation of his children to choose him over their mother. Whether he loved any of his children genuinely is questionable at best. While he warned Elizabeth away from Circus Baby, he also designed the machine that killed her and apparently made no serious efforts to rescue or help her afterward, even allowing technicians to shock her with electricity to control her behavior. When Elizabeth died and possessed Baby, William simply locked the animatronic in his underground rental facility, treating his daughter's new form as property to be stored, rather than a child to be saved. His treatment of Michael was equally callous. After the events of Sister Location, where Michael was used as a flesh suit by Ennard, William showed no concern for his son's survival or well-being. Instead, all evidence suggests William saw his children as tools or experiments, means to an end in his quest for immortality, rather than people worthy of love or protection. This wasn't a father who made mistakes out of misguided love. This was a man fundamentally incapable of prioritizing anyone's well-being above his own obsessions. The springlock failure that transformed William into Springtrap represents a twisted form of poetic justice. Decades after his murder spree, when he returned to the abandoned Freddy Fazbear's Pizza to dismantle the animatronics and harvest their remnant, the spirits of his victims cornered him in the safe room. In desperation, William climbed into the old Spring Bonnie suit, perhaps believing it would protect him, or that the spirits couldn't harm him within it. But the suit long neglected in a damp environment, proved as treacherous as everything else William created. Moisture from the leaking ceiling or his own panicked breathing triggered the spring locks, and the compressed animatronic parts snapped shut with devastating force. The mechanisms pierced his flesh, crushed his bones, impaled him through organs and limbs. It should have been a death sentence, a final end to a murderous career. But William Afton didn't die, at least not in any conventional sense. The remnant he had injected into the Funtime animatronics, the supernatural properties of possession he had studied so obsessively, somehow kept him alive in an undead state, fused with the Spring Bonnie suit. He became Springtrap, a horrific amalgam of rotting corpse and decaying animatronic. Trapped for 30 years in that sealed room until Fazbear's Fright unearthed him for their horror attraction. Even destruction couldn't end William Afton permanently. After the fire at Fazbear's Fright, he emerged as Scraptrap, his suit more damaged and his body more visible, still animate despite everything. In Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, Henry Emily finally succeeded in gathering all the remaining possessed animatronics, including William, into one location where he set a fire hot enough to destroy the remnant, binding them to the physical world. William burned, his screams echoing through the flames as Henry delivered a speech condemning him for the wound he first inflicted on Henry through Charlotte's murder and all the suffering that followed. But even this might not have been the true end. William's consciousness, or at least an echo of it combined with the mimic's programming, emerged as Glitchtrap in the virtual reality game Help Wanted, a digital ghost created when Fazbear Entertainment scanned old circuit boards containing fragments of his evil. This manifestation could possess people through the digital realm, turning them into his followers and continuing his legacy of manipulation and control. In Security Breach, he appeared again as Burntrap, his physical form reconstructed and waiting in the ruins beneath the Pizzaplex, pulled back by the blob before he could escape once more. William Afton represents the franchise's central evil, a man whose intelligence and innovation were matched only by his complete lack of humanity. He never showed remorse for his actions. He never sought redemption. Every step of his journey, from businessman to killer to undead monster to digital ghost, was driven by his selfish desire to cheat death and his willingness to sacrifice anyone, including his own family, to achieve that goal. He is the reason the animatronics are haunted, the reason the Afton family fell apart, the reason dozens of children died and their families grieved, and the reason the horror continues even decades after his first crimes. In understanding William Afton, we understand the engine that drives Five Nights at Freddy's entire narrative. He is the wound from which all other suffering flows, the architect who built machines of death and called them entertainment, the father who valued his research over his children's lives, and the monster who proved that sometimes evil doesn't need a tragic backstory or redemptive qualities. Sometimes evil is simply a man who looked at the choice between right and wrong and chose wrong again and again, until there was nothing human left in him at all. The mysterious Mrs. Afton. Perhaps the most enigmatic member of the Afton family is the woman who bore William's children and then seemingly vanished from the narrative entirely. Mrs. Afton remains unnamed in the official games, a ghost whose absence shapes the family as much as her presence might have. What we know about her comes from fragments, implications and theories built on the thinnest of evidence, yet her role as mother to Michael, Elizabeth and the crying child can't be dismissed simply because the games chose to leave her in shadow. The most commonly theorized name for Mrs. Afton is Clara, derived from a character in the in-universe television show The Immortal and the Restless that plays during Sister Location. This soap opera features a vampire named Vlad, who wears purple, clearly meant to represent William, arguing with a human woman named Clara about the paternity of their child and various domestic problems. The parallel seems too deliberate to be coincidental. Vlad and Clara's dysfunctional relationship, filled with denial and conflict, appears to mirror the Afton marriage, giving us one of the few glimpses into what their family dynamic might have looked like before everything fell apart. Other theories suggest her name might have been Rose, Roselle, or even Lorraine, though these lack the textual support that Clara has. Some fans have gone so far as to suggest William had two different wives at different points in his life, which would explain discrepancies in how Mrs. Afton is referenced or represented, though this theory has less support. What remains consistent across most interpretations is that Mrs. Afton was British, matching the accents of William, Michael, and Elizabeth, and that she had ginger or strawberry blonde hair, which would explain Elizabeth's orange hair given William's brown locks. From the Security Breach CD tapes, we learn crucial information about what happened to this marriage. The tapes, which detail a therapy patient named Vanessa, whose father Bill eerily parallels William Afton, reveal that this family went through a bitter divorce and custody battle. Bill, clearly a stand-in for William, manipulated his children by telling them to tell the court that their mother was a criminal, ensuring he would win custody. This manipulation worked. The children, whether out of fear of their father or genuine belief in his lies, testified against their mother, and William maintained control over them after the separation. This paints a picture of Mrs. Afton as a victim of William's manipulation as much as his children were. She may have been trying to escape with her children, to remove them from William's influence, only to find herself outmaneuvered by a man willing to use his own children as weapons in a legal battle. The divorce likely occurred sometime in the early 1980s, possibly around 1980, when Elizabeth was still young, giving William sole custody of the children during the most crucial and tragic years of their lives. What happened to Mrs. Afton after losing custody remains one of the biggest mysteries in FNAF lore. Several theories exist, each with varying degrees of support. The most tragic suggests she committed suicide after losing her children, unable to bear the separation and knowing they were in William's care. This theory draws some support from patterns in the Fazbear Fright stories, where mothers in similar situations meet tragic ends, though never at the direct hands of their partners. Another theory proposes she died in an accident, possibly involving an animatronic, which would fit the franchise's recurring theme of animatronic-related tragedies touching every aspect of the Afton family's life. A less tragic but perhaps more haunting possibility is that Mrs. Afton is still alive somewhere, having been forced to leave her children in William's hands, knowing what kind of man he was but powerless to save them. She would have watched from afar, perhaps, as newspaper articles reported the bite of 83, as Circus Baby's pizza world opened and closed under mysterious circumstances, as child after child went missing from Freddy Fazbear's pizza locations. She would have known, or at least suspected, what William was capable of, and been forced to live with the knowledge that she couldn't protect her children from their own father. One of the most persistent theories about Mrs. Afton suggests she might possess Ballora, the graceful dancing animatronic from Sister Location. This interpretation, while popular in the community, lacks direct confirmation in the games. The theory draws connections from Bellora's design and her song lyrics, which speak of a place she can't see and wondering if she'll be noticed, language that some interpret as a mother's spirit trapped and unable to see her children. William's pattern of creating animatronics that reflect people he knew could support this reading, though it remains speculative. The evidence for this theory includes Bellora's design, her closed eyes suggesting an inability to see, or perhaps a deliberate blindness, her graceful movements that might reflect Mrs. Afton's own grace, and her placement in sister location, alongside the other Funtime animatronics that William created. Some fans note that Bellora's eyes, when they do open, share a similar color to Funtime Foxy's. And since Funtime Foxy was possessed by Elizabeth, according to some interpretations, this could suggest a family connection. Additionally, in Security Breach, a group of staff bots arranged like a family includes one that resembles Bellora, potentially representing Mrs. Afton in an Afton family portrait. However, this theory has significant holes. There's no direct evidence in the games confirming Bellora is possessed at all, let alone by Mrs. Afton specifically. Bellora's behavior in sister location seems consistent with advanced AI programming rather than supernatural possession. She doesn't recognize Michael or speak in ways that suggest a personal connection to him. Her song could simply be atmospheric rather than literal. And unlike other possessed animatronics, Bellora shows no signs of the trauma or purpose that typically drives possessed characters in FNAF. She's just as likely to be an empty shell, another of William's creations with no soul inside, her seeming life coming purely from sophisticated programming. What we can say with more certainty is what Mrs. Afton meant to the family structure. As a mother, she was likely the only source of genuine warmth in the Afton household during her time there. The fact that Elizabeth specifically is associated with traditionally feminine colors, pink and white, and seems to have had a girly bedroom in the FNAF 4 house, suggests Mrs. Afton may have been a more attentive parent to her daughter than William ever was. The youngest son's collection of plushies and his gentler nature might also reflect her influence, a softer presence in a house increasingly dominated by William's obsessions and Michael's bullying. Her absence during the crucial events of '83 is notable and telling. Where was Mrs. Afton when Michael was tormenting his younger brother day after day? Where was she during the crying child's birthday party when the bullying reached its fatal climax? If she had already been removed from the family through divorce, it explains her inability to intervene, to protect, to be the buffer between William's neglect and Michael's cruelty that her youngest son so desperately needed. Her absence created a vacuum that allowed tragedy to flourish unchecked. Some fans theorize that Mrs. Afton might have been William's first victim, that he experimented on her with Remnant before moving on to strangers' children. But this seems inconsistent with what we know of William's progression as a killer. His murders appear to have started with Charlotte Emily in '83, motivated by jealousy of Henry's stable family life. If Mrs. Afton died before this, it would have been from other causes, perhaps an accident at one of William's facilities, which would give a tragic irony to her fate being sealed by the very animatronics her husband created. The theory that William killed his wife deliberately seems unlikely, given patterns in the franchise. In Fazbear Frights and the novel trilogy, when couples face tragedy, the deaths are consistently from accidents or illness, never from deliberate murder by a loved one. William killed many people, but targeting his wife specifically doesn't fit his pattern. His victims were children. chosen because their remnant was supposedly more potent, more useful for his experiments. Mrs. Afton would have held no scientific interest for him, and if he wanted rid of her, divorce achieved that without the risk of murder charges. What Mrs. Afton represents in the FNAF narrative is the road not taken, the possibility of a different outcome if someone had been there to intervene in William's descent into madness. She represents the family that might have been, before obsession and cruelty tore it apart. Her absence is a wound in the family structure, creating instability that allowed each child to fall victim to tragedy in turn. Without a mother to protect them, to notice the warning signs, to stand between them and William's negligence, the Afton children were left vulnerable. In Michael's case, her absence might have contributed to his behavior as a bully, acting out the anger and confusion of a child whose family was falling apart. For Elizabeth, her absence meant no one was there to supervise her properly when she became fascinated with Circus Baby. No one to override William's inadequate warning and ensure she stayed safe. For the crying child, her absence meant no one intervened in the relentless bullying. No one provided the actual protection and comfort he needed, rather than just surveillance through plush toys. Mrs. Afton's mystery serves a narrative purpose in keeping the focus firmly on William as the source of the family's destruction, and on the children as victims of circumstance and neglect. She exists in negative space, defined by her absence, allowing us to imagine what might have been different if she had been there, while acknowledging that ultimately, even the best mother might not have been able to stop William Afton once his obsessions took hold. Whether she died tragically, lives in exile from her children, or haunts the games as Ballora, Mrs. Afton remains a crucial part of understanding the Afton family. She bore 3 children who would all meet terrible fates. She married a man who would become one of horror gaming's most infamous villains. She loved, lost, and disappeared, leaving behind only questions and the ghost of what the Afton family might have been if things had gone differently. In a franchise filled with monsters and victims, Mrs. Afton occupies a unique space as both a victim of William's manipulation and a mother whose absence allowed her children to become victims in turn. Michael Afton. From bully to redeemer, Michael Afton stands apart from his family as the only member who appears to have sought redemption for his sins, the only one who actively tried to undo some of the damage the Afton name had caused. His journey from the cruel older brother, tormenting a terrified child, to the purple corpse hunting his father through burning pizzerias, represents one of the most complex character arcs in Five Nights at Freddy's. Yet even this attempted redemption is tainted, forced upon him by guilt and circumstance rather than genuine moral awakening. A messy and incomplete attempt to make amends that would ultimately cost him his life, or whatever passed for life after Ennard was finished with him. Born as the eldest son of William and Mrs. Afton, probably sometime in the late 1960s or early 1970s, given his apparent age in 1983, Michael grew up in a household dominated by his father's obsessions with animatronics and Remnant. We can imagine what his childhood might have been like. William absent for long hours working on his creations, Mrs. Afton trying to hold the family together, and young Michael learning early that attention in the Afton household came not through good behavior, but through action, through making yourself impossible to ignore. By 1983, Michael had become what the fandom knows as Foxy Bro, a teenager who delighted in tormenting his younger brother with a foxy mask and constant pranks, This wasn't playful teasing between siblings. This was sustained psychological torture of a child already terrified of animatronics. Michael would hide in closets and behind televisions, jumping out to scare his brother into tears. He would lock his younger sibling in rooms, trapping him alone with his fears. He recruited his friends to help corner the crying child at Fredbear's family diner, surrounding him with animatronic masks, while the poor boy sobbed and begged them to stop. Why did Michael behave this way? The games never explicitly tell us, but we can piece together a picture from context. This was a boy growing up in an increasingly dysfunctional household, with a father who barely acknowledged his existence except to monitor him through cameras hidden in plush toys. His parents' marriage was apparently falling apart, or had already dissolved through divorce. His father was, unbeknownst to young Michael, actively murdering children. The stress and neglect of the Afton household would warp anyone, and Michael expressed his pain the way many troubled teenagers do, by inflicting pain on someone even more vulnerable than himself. This doesn't excuse his behavior, of course. Michael made a choice to torment his younger brother day after day, to escalate the pranks, to ignore the obvious distress he was causing. When the crying child begged through tears not to be taken to Fredbear's for his birthday, Michael ignored those pleas. When his friends suggested the final prank, lifting his brother up and shoving his head into Fredbear's mouth for a big kiss, Michael went along with it. He watched his brother's tears activate the spring locks. He watched Fredbear's jaws close on his brother's head. He watched his brother die from his injuries, likely in the hospital days later, based on the FNAF 4 minigames. This moment shattered Michael Afton, transforming him from a careless bully into something different, something consumed by guilt. In the hospital, we hear an apology, a voice that's likely Michael's begging his brother for forgiveness. After the crying child's death, Michael's life took a sharp turn. Whether William blamed him directly or simply withdrew further into his experiments, Michael was left to process his guilt alone. He had killed his brother. It was an accident, a prank gone horrifically wrong, but intention doesn't matter much to a corpse or to the family left behind. Years passed. Michael grew into adulthood carrying the weight of what he'd done, living in a family that was disintegrating piece by piece. Elizabeth died sometime in the mid to late 1980s, killed by Circus Baby at Circus Baby's Pizza World, though when Michael learned of this remains unclear. William vanished into his work, becoming increasingly obsessed with remnant and immortality. The family that had never been whole fractured completely, leaving Michael adrift in a world where he was known primarily as the son of William Afton and the brother who had killed his sibling. At some point, Michael received communication from his father, though the exact nature and timing of this is debated. In Sister Location's Golden Freddy cutscene, Michael says, "Father, it's me, Michael. I did it. I found it. It was right where you said it would be," suggesting William had sent him on some kind of mission. The most common interpretation is that William told Michael to go to Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals to free Elizabeth from the animatronic that held her soul, though whether this was genuine paternal concern or another manipulation remains unclear. Michael arrived at the underground facility using his name or an alias, taking a job as a technician for the night shift. Over the course of 5 nights, he encountered the fun-time animatronics, advanced robots equipped with child-catching mechanisms and infused with remnant from William's earlier murders. Baby, possessed by Elizabeth, seemed to recognize something in him, possibly mistaking him for William. due to their similar appearances, a detail that would become relevant again. She guided him through the facility, offering advice on avoiding the other animatronics, speaking in a voice that might have held traces of his sister underneath the artificial intelligence. The truth of Baby's guidance revealed itself on night 5. The Funtime animatronics had been planning their escape, combining their endoskeletons into an entity called Enard, and they needed a way out of the facility, a disguise that could walk among humans unnoticed. They needed Michael's body. Baby lured him to the scooping room under false pretenses. The scooper, a device designed to remove animatronic endoskeletons and also used to inject remnant, hollowed out Michael's insides with mechanical precision. Enard climbed inside the resulting shell, wearing Michael's skin like a suit, using his body to escape to the surface. This should have been the end of Michael Afton. By all rights, he died in that scooping room. His internal organs removed, his body reduced to a hollow vessel. But something impossible happened. The remnant that infused Enard, the supernatural properties that William had spent years studying and exploiting, somehow kept Michael alive, or at least animated. Days or weeks later, as the cutscenes show, Michael's body began to decay and turn purple. He walked through his neighborhood trying to maintain a normal life while his flesh rotted and his skin took on an unnatural hue. Eventually, in a scene both grotesque and darkly comedic, Enard evacuated themselves from Michael's body, regurgitating the mass of wires and animatronic parts into the sewers. Michael collapsed. He should have stayed dead, but Baby's voice echoed in his head or his memory. "You won't die." And impossibly, he didn't. Michael Afton rose again, now existing as an undead corpse, animated by remnant, his skin purple, his body failing but somehow still functional. He became what fans call Purple Guy, though this nickname creates confusion since William also appears as a purple figure in minigames. Michael's purple coloration represents death and decay, his body held together by supernatural forces, neither truly alive nor completely dead. In the private room in Sister Location, Michael records or thinks his final message, revealing his motivation for everything that follows. "Father, I'm going to come find you." This wasn't about redemption for his own sins, at least not primarily. This was about confronting William Afton, about stopping his father's crimes, about somehow making right what had gone so horribly wrong. Whether Michael sought to save remaining victims, to free his siblings' souls, or simply to punish William for everything he'd done, his goal became singular: track down his father and end this. Michael's journey led him to take a night guard position at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza sometime in 1993, working under what appears to be the alias Mike Schmidt. Evidence from the survival logbook strongly suggests this guard was Michael, with the book containing references and drawings that only someone who experienced Sister Location would know. He worked the night shift, fending off the animatronics possessed by the children William had murdered. These spirits, confused and angry, mistook him for William due to their similar appearances, attacking him night after night as he survived through careful monitoring and limited power resources. Michael endured. His survival logbook from this period shows sketches of Nightmare Fredbear, suggesting he also experienced the nightmares shown in FNAF 4's main gameplay, though whether these were actual events, PTSD-induced dreams, or somehow connected to William's fear experiments remains debated. After 7 nights, Michael was fired for tampering with the animatronics' AI settings and for the odor his decaying body emitted. His employment ended, but his mission continued. At some point after this, William returned to the abandoned Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and attempted to harvest remnant from the animatronics by dismantling them. The spirits cornered him, forcing him into the Spring Bonnie suit, where the spring locks failed, transforming William into Springtrap. The building was sealed, William trapped in the safe room, and 30 years passed. Michael may have been searching for his father during this time, or simply waiting, existing in his undead state while the world moved on around him. A purple corpse that somehow held a job and moved through society despite being clinically dead. When Fazbear's Fright opened as a horror attraction, Michael applied as the security guard, likely knowing or suspecting that William would be there. The phantoms that appeared during the week, burnt apparitions of various animatronics, targeted Michael specifically with their jump scares, suggesting supernatural forces at work. Whether Michael himself started the fire that burned Fazbear's Fright, or simply allowed it to happen, his plan to confront his father failed. William survived, crawling from the wreckage at Springtrap, still animate despite the flames. The final confrontation came in Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. Henry Emily, William's old partner, orchestrated an elaborate trap disguised as a franchise opportunity. Michael took the role of manager, likely working with Henry, or at least understanding what was really happening. He salvaged the animatronics that appeared in the alley. Scrap Baby containing Elizabeth's spirit, Molten Freddy formed from the remaining Funtime animatronics and possessed by the missing children, Lefty containing the puppet and Charlotte's soul, and Scraptrap, William's latest form. Henry's speech at the end of the completion ending acknowledges Michael directly. Although for one of you, the darkest pit of hell has opened to swallow you whole, so don't keep the devil waiting, old friend. Michael was the old friend, someone Henry knew and trusted to see this through. The building burned, temperatures rising to levels that would destroy the remnant binding the souls to their mechanical prisons. Michael chose to stay, to burn alongside his father and siblings, to end the Afton legacy once and for all. The gravestone ending shows Michael's grave among those of the missing children, suggesting he found some measure of peace in death. His role in his brother's death perhaps forgiven, his attempts at redemption acknowledged even if they could never truly make up for what he'd done. He was the only Afton who tried to stop the cycle of horror their family had created. The only one who turned against William rather than enabling him. His redemption was messy and incomplete, motivated as much by guilt as genuine altruism, but it was real nonetheless. Michael Afton's story is tragic in a way his father's never was. William chose evil consciously and repeatedly. Michael made one terrible mistake as a teenager, a mistake that haunted him for the rest of his life and beyond. He spent decades trying to fix what couldn't be fixed, to save siblings who couldn't be saved, to stop a father who kept coming back no matter how many times he was destroyed. In the end, Michael's redemption came not through grand heroic gestures, but through simple persistence, through choosing every day to keep fighting his father's evil, even when it would have been easier to walk away. He was a bully who became a victim, who became something like a hero, not through any grand transformation of character, but through the gradual wearing down of guilt and responsibility into determination. Michael Afton proved that even the Afton name could be associated with something other than pure evil, that even someone who had done something unforgivable could still choose to spend their life trying to make it right. His story doesn't wash away his sins, doesn't excuse the tears his brother cried or the death that followed, but it does show that he tried. And sometimes in a universe as dark as Five Nights at Freddy's, trying is the most anyone can do. Elizabeth Afton, Daddy's little girl. Elizabeth Afton entered the world as the only daughter of William and Mrs. Afton. Born presumably sometime in the late 1970s or early 1980s, based on her apparent age in the mid to late 80s when she died. She represents a particular kind of tragedy in the FNAF universe. The tragedy of a child whose love and trust in her father led directly to her doom. Of innocence destroyed not by malice, but by a combination of curiosity and a machine designed to kill. Her story is shorter than her brother's, but no less significant. And her possession of Circus Baby and later transformation into Scrap Baby makes her one of the franchise's most recurring antagonists. From what we can piece together of Elizabeth's life, she was a sweet, polite, shy girl with an intense fascination with her father's work. In a family where William barely acknowledged his children's existence, where emotional warmth was scarce and attention had to be fought for, Elizabeth found a way to connect with her father through his creations. She loved the animatronics, seeing in them not the horror her younger brother did, but wonder and magic. When William began working on Circus Baby's Pizza World, creating a new line of animatronics including one named Circus Baby, Elizabeth became obsessed. Circus Baby was special. The animatronic featured red pigtails, a clown aesthetic, and could dispense ice cream and make balloons. To a young girl starving for her father's attention, Circus Baby might have seemed like a gift made specifically for her, a mechanical princess created by her father, the inventor. Elizabeth certainly interpreted it that way, believing Baby was made just for her, created in her honor. She begged her father repeatedly to let her see Circus Baby, to play with the animatronic, to experience the wonder of this creation up close. William's response was firm and clear. Stay away from Circus Baby. He forbade Elizabeth from going near the animatronic, warning her that it was dangerous. This was one of the few moments in William Afton's parenting where he actually tried to protect one of his children. And it's darkly ironic that his warning was both absolutely necessary and completely insufficient. He knew what Circus Baby was designed to do. He had programmed it himself. The animatronic was equipped with a child-catching mechanism, a claw in its stomach that would grab lone children offering them ice cream, pulling them inside where they would die. This was intentional design, part of William's experiments with Remnant and his pursuit of animatronics that could kill children efficiently. But William's warning, delivered without explanation or real supervision, couldn't compete with Elizabeth's curiosity and her desperate desire for her father's attention. She couldn't understand why this beautiful animatronic, this creature that seemed made just for her, was forbidden. If it was so dangerous, why had her father built it at all? Why couldn't he simply make it safe? These weren't questions a child like Elizabeth could answer, and William apparently never bothered to explain properly. He simply told her no, and expected that to be enough. During a private testing event at Circus Baby's Pizza World, Elizabeth saw her opportunity. She snuck away from wherever she was supposed to be, evading whatever minimal supervision was in place, and approached Circus Baby. The animatronic was alone in a room, and crucially, Baby's programming detected that only one child was present. This triggered the ice cream dispensing protocol. Baby offered Elizabeth ice cream, the friendly clown face hiding the lethal mechanism beneath. Elizabeth approached, likely delighted that this animatronic her father had built was paying attention to her, was offering her something special. Baby's stomach opened, the claw extended. In a moment too fast for a child to react to, Elizabeth was grabbed and pulled inside the animatronic, the hatch closing behind her. The trauma killed her, her small body unable to survive being crushed and stored within the mechanical frame. William's worst fears about his daughter and his creation had come true. Not through malice, but through his own design meeting his daughter's innocent curiosity. The incident forced the immediate closure of Circus Baby's Pizza World. William fabricated a cover story about gas leaks to explain why the venue never opened to the public, hiding the truth of what had happened to his daughter. But for once, William's carefully constructed plans had backfired on him personally. His daughter was dead, killed by a machine he had designed specifically to murder children. The fact that Elizabeth wasn't his intended target makes the tragedy more poignant, but doesn't absolve William of responsibility. He built a death trap, put it in a place his daughter could access, and his inadequate warnings failed to keep her safe. Elizabeth's death differed from the typical possession in Five Nights at Freddy's. The missing children were murdered and stuffed into suits, their souls seeking revenge and confused about their state. Charlotte Emily was killed outside and possessed the security puppet that tried to save her. But Elizabeth was killed by Baby's intended function, killed and immediately stored within the animatronic in the exact way William had designed it to work. Her possession of Circus Baby wasn't just a spiritual attachment. It was an immediate merging, her soul binding to the animatronic at the moment of death, her last thoughts of her father's creation becoming her eternal prison. This possession changed Circus Baby in subtle but significant ways. The animatronic's eyes, originally blue as seen in the death minigame, turned green, Elizabeth's eye color. Baby's voice, when she spoke, carried hints of a child underneath the artificial intelligence. But Baby wasn't just Elizabeth, and Elizabeth wasn't fully in control. The advanced AI William had programmed into Baby continued to function alongside Elizabeth's consciousness, creating a merged entity where it became difficult to tell where the machine ended and the girl began. After Circus Baby's Pizza World closed, William moved Baby and the other fun-time animatronics to the underground facility that would become Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals. He apparently rebuilt or repaired Baby, possibly disturbed by the green eyes that revealed his daughter's presence within the machine. But if he felt genuine grief or remorse, his actions didn't show it. William allowed technicians to shock Baby with electricity to control her behavior, knowing his daughter's spirit was inside. He locked her in an underground facility, treating her as property rather than as his child who needed help. Elizabeth, trapped in Baby and increasingly merged with the AI, spent years in that facility. She became familiar with its layouts, learning to manipulate systems and command the smaller bidybabs. When Henry Emily took over management of the facility, she cooperated with him, possibly hoping for eventual release or simply going along with whoever was currently in charge. But underneath, Elizabeth's personality was changing, twisted by isolation and her merged state with Baby's programming. The sweet, polite girl was becoming something colder, more calculating, more focused on escape than on anything resembling a normal existence. When Michael arrived at sister location, Elizabeth, through Baby, saw an opportunity. She may have initially mistaken him for William due to their similar appearances, or perhaps she recognized her brother, but saw him as a tool for escape, rather than as family to be saved or warned. Baby's guidance through the facility seemed helpful at first, but it was all leading to one goal: the scooping room, where Michael would be hollowed out and used as a skin suit for Enard, the amalgamation of the Funtime animatronics endoskeletons. The creation of Enard represented Elizabeth and the other Funtime inhabitants combining forces to escape, but it also showed how far Elizabeth had fallen from the innocent girl who just wanted to see her father's creation. She helped kill her brother, or at least end his life as he knew it, using him as a vessel without apparent remorse. When Michael's body began to decay and Enard realized they couldn't sustain themselves in a rotting corpse, Elizabeth's voice echoed the promise, "You won't die." Though whether this was genuine concern for Michael, or simply ensuring their escape vehicle didn't fully expire, remains ambiguous. After leaving Michael's body, Enard retreated to the sewers. Time passed, and conflicts arose within the merged consciousness. The other souls, likely the remnants of the missing children that William had injected into the Funtimes, began to resent Elizabeth's leadership. They staged what the fandom calls a robot rebellion, forcibly ejecting Baby from Enard. Elizabeth found herself alone, separated from the collective, with just her own endoskeleton and whatever remained of her identity. She rebuilt herself using scraps from the rental facility, creating a new form that fans and the games call Scrap Baby. This version of Elizabeth was even more disturbing than Circus Baby had been. Her body was skeletal and exposed, claw-like hands extending into deadly weapons, roller skates on her feet for mobility, and her face cracked and damaged, revealing the machinery beneath. The little girl who had loved balloons and ice cream was gone entirely, replaced by something that had learned to survive through violence and deception. Scrap Baby made her way to Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, drawn by Henry's lure along with the other animatronics. In the salvage scenarios, she speaks directly to the player, who is likely Michael, with a voice that's cold and calculating. She talks about being on stage, about having access to more victims, about making her father proud by continuing his work of murdering children. This wasn't Elizabeth speaking. This was what years of isolation and merging with homicidal AI had created. A being that had adopted William's goals as her own, that saw child murder as a way to gain her father's approval even in death. The most disturbing moment comes in the completion ending, where Scrap Baby speaks to William directly. "I will make you proud, Daddy." She had taken her childhood desire for her father's attention and twisted it into something monstrous, believing that becoming like him, that killing as he did, would finally make him acknowledge her worth. It's a heartbreaking corruption of a daughter's love, proving how thoroughly William Afton destroyed everything he touched, even the one child who might have genuinely loved him. The fire Henry set destroyed Scrap Baby along with the others, the heat melting the remnant and freeing Elizabeth's soul. We can hope she found peace after this, that the real Elizabeth, the girl who loved her father despite his flaws and just wanted to play with a pretty animatronic, was freed from the twisted consciousness she had become. The gravestone ending doesn't show her name among those we see, but the speech Henry gives addresses her directly, suggesting she too was granted rest. Elizabeth Afton's story is the tragedy of misplaced love and trust. She trusted her father completely, believed in his creations, and that faith killed her. She loved an animatronic that was designed to kill children, and it did its job perfectly. She wanted nothing more than her father's attention and approval. and in death became so twisted that she thought continuing his murderous work would somehow gain that approval. Her arc shows how William Afton's evil extended beyond his direct victims to warp and destroy even those who loved him. She never had Michael's opportunity for redemption. She never had the crying child's innocence preserved in death. Instead, Elizabeth Afton became what her father had created her to be, not intentionally, but through a horrible intersection of neglectful parenting and deadly machinery. The girl who just wanted ice cream, and to make her daddy proud, ended up becoming one of the franchise's most tragic villains, forever associated not with the innocent child she was, but with the mechanical horror she became. The crying child, the first victim. At the foundation of the Afton family's tragedy lies a boy whose name we don't even know for certain. Fans have called him many things over the years: the crying child, the bite victim, Evan, Chris, Norman, CC, or simply the youngest Afton son. But the games never confirm his identity, leaving him as anonymous as his tears were frequent. This nameless boy, the youngest of William's children, died in 1983 at his own birthday party, his head crushed in Fredbear's jaws while his brother watched. His death set in motion the chain of events that would define Michael's life and arguably contributed to the complete disintegration of the Afton family. We know this boy primarily through the FNAF 4 minigames, which show us the week leading up to his death in a series of 8-bit scenes that feel less like memories and more like nightmares. The boy we see is small even for his age, wearing a striped black and grey shirt with blue shorts and brown shoes. His most defining characteristic is visible in every frame. Tears perpetually streaming down his face, black lines trailing from his eyes like markers of constant sorrow. He doesn't just cry occasionally. He cries constantly, a child living in a state of sustained terror that no one in his family bothers to address meaningfully. His fear of the animatronics isn't an irrational phobia. There's something deeper there, something that suggests he witnessed or experienced trauma related to the animatronic characters that his father created. The minigames show him recoiling from even toys resembling the animatronics, keeping plastic figures of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy on a dresser, but seemingly unable to play with them like normal children would. He has a particular fear of Fredbear and Spring Bonnie, the two characters from his father's diner, and repeatedly begs not to be taken there. Something happened, something the games never show us directly, that instilled in this child a bone-deep terror of the very characters most children found delightful. Some theories suggest he witnessed one of William's murders, perhaps seeing his father in the Spring Bonnie suit, luring children away, though this seems unlikely given the timeline. Charlotte Emily's murder in '83 was William's first confirmed kill, and it happened around the same time as the crying child's death. More plausibly, the child may have witnessed a spring lock failure, seeing the horrific results when the mechanisms inside the suit snapped closed on an employee. Such an event would certainly explain both his terror and William's careful surveillance of him, monitoring a potential witness who might reveal dangerous secrets about the suit's flaws. The child's only comfort came from his collection of plush toys, particularly a Fredbear plush that seemed to follow him everywhere and speak to him with advice and warnings. The plush's behavior suggests it may have contained surveillance equipment, possibly a camera and speaker that allowed someone, likely William, to monitor the child and communicate remotely, though this connection is never explicitly shown. Some theories suggest the Fredbear plush was originally a gift from William meant as genuine comfort, but William's implementation of surveillance technology turned it into another form of control. Other theories propose that someone else, possibly Henry Emily, or even a supernatural force, spoke through the plush, though William remains the most likely candidate. The Fredbear plush's messages are cryptic and troubling. Tomorrow is another day. Sounds like comfort, but there's something ominous in its repetition. He will be there again tonight, suggests the boy's nightmares or fears are predictable and recurring. You know what will happen if he catches you implies both a specific threat and that the child has experienced it before. Most significantly, the plush tells him you are broken after the bite and promises I will put you back together. A vow whose meaning and potential fulfillment has sparked endless debate in the fandom. The child's daily life, as shown in the mini-games, is characterized by isolation, despite living in a house with at least 2 siblings. His room can be locked from the outside, a detail that's deeply disturbing when you consider the implications. Michael regularly locks his brother in his room as punishment or for his own entertainment, leaving the child to cry alone while calling out for help that never comes. The child encounters his sister, presumably Elizabeth, in various locations around the house, but there's no indication she ever intervenes in the bullying or offers comfort. His father's presence is notable primarily in its absence. William never appears directly in the FNAF 4 minigames, existing only as a disembodied voice through the Fredbear plush, and possibly as the purple figure we briefly see setting up locations for the child to visit. William doesn't stop Michael's bullying. He doesn't address his son's obvious trauma and terror. He observes, monitors, perhaps even experiments, but he doesn't parent. The child is left to navigate his fears alone, armed only with cryptic advice from a talking plush that may or may not have his well-being in mind. The week leading to his death shows the bullying escalating. 5 days before his party, the child is locked in his room, crying on the floor while his brother laughs outside. 4 days before, Michael jumps out from behind the television, wearing his foxy mask, startling his brother into another crying fit on the floor. 3 days before, Michael locks his brother in the parts and service room at Fredbear's family diner, trapping him in a dark space with the spring-lock suits, while his friends laugh outside. 2 days before, Michael corners him at Fredbear's while wearing the foxy mask alongside friends wearing Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica masks, taunting, "He's gonna bite ya." On the day of his birthday party, the harassment reaches its terrible climax. Michael and his friends encounter the child at Fredbear's family diner, where he's presumably supposed to be celebrating his birthday, but seems to want only to leave. His brother and the masked friends pick him up, carrying him toward the stage while he struggles and cries. They approach Fredbear, the animatronic the child fears most, and, in what they clearly think is a harmless prank, they lift him up to Fredbear's mouth. He wants to give Fredbear a big kiss, one of them says, laughing as they shove the child's head toward the animatronic jaws. What happened next will forever be known as the Bite of 83. Fredbear's spring-lock jaw mechanism activated, possibly triggered by the child's tears providing the moisture that would loosen the locks, and clamped down on his head with mechanical force. There's a moment captured in the minigame where you can see it happen. The boy's head inside Fredbear's mouth, the crunch implied though not shown, and then the screen goes dark. The child's frontal lobe was either severely damaged or completely destroyed, leaving him with fatal injuries that would kill him within days. The aftermath plays out in a hospital room, where the child lies in a coma, surrounded by the plush toys he loved, flowers presumably from well-wishers, and the steady beep of medical equipment tracking his failing vitals. A voice, likely Michael's, apologizes through tears. "Can you hear me? I don't know if you can hear me. I'm sorry." These words come too late, offered to a brother who may or may not still be conscious enough to understand them. The Fredbear plush speaks too, its words ambiguous about whether they come from William, Henry, or something else. "You're broken. I will put you back together." And then the flat line, the sustained tone indicating heart failure, and the child dies. Except the story doesn't end there, because this is Five Nights at Freddy's, and death is rarely the end. The question of what happened to the crying child after death has generated more theories and debate than almost any other aspect of FNAF lore. Several possibilities exist, each with varying levels of evidence and community support. The most widely discussed theory suggests the crying child may have possessed Golden Freddy, either alone or sharing the animatronic with Cassidy, one of William's murder victims. This interpretation draws from the Happiest Day minigame from FNAF 3, which shows a child wearing a shirt matching the crying child's receiving a birthday party from the other missing children before fading away. Imagery that could represent him finally receiving the peaceful celebration he was denied in life. The layout of this minigame mirrors Fredbear's family diner, and the child receiving the party shares visual characteristics with the crying child. Though whether this confirms possession or simply represents symbolic closure remains open to interpretation. Another theory proposes that he became Shadow Freddy, the dark figure that appears throughout the games and that leads the animatronics to William in FNAF 3. This interpretation draws connections from Shadow Freddy's color palette, matching Golden Freddy's but darker, and from behavioral patterns that some believe could represent the crying child's complicated relationship with his father, though this remains highly speculative. A third interpretation suggests the child's consciousness was somehow absorbed into Michael after his death, possibly through William's experiments or through supernatural means, though the mechanics of this would be unclear. This reading attempts to explain Michael's nightmares in FNAF 4's main gameplay, where the player facing the nightmare animatronics might be Michael reliving his brother's fears. The survival logbook contains what appear to be conversations between Mike Schmidt and a spirit that might be the crying child, with questions like, "Do you remember your name?" and "Do you have dreams?" that some interpret as evidence of merged or trapped consciousness, though alternative explanations for these messages exist. Some theorists believe the Fredbear plush's promise to put him back together was fulfilled through William's remnant experiments, possibly involving the Funtime animatronics or other projects we haven't seen fully detailed. This could mean the crying child exists in some form within the amalgamation of souls and remnant that William created, his identity preserved, but scattered among various vessels. The release of the week before novel confirmed that Michael is the older brother, not the crying child, settling one major debate, but leaving the question of the younger brother's ultimate fate and name still open. We know he died in 1983. We know his death occurred at Fredbear's family diner during his birthday party. We know he possessed something or became something after death, but the specifics, like his name, remain frustratingly out of reach. What we can say definitively is that the crying child represents the Afton family's first victim, the first casualty of their dysfunction and neglect. His death occurred before William's active murder spree began, making it perhaps an accident of bad parenting rather than malicious intent, though the distinction hardly matters to the child who died. Michael's guilt over this incident would shape the rest of his existence. William's failure to prevent it, to intervene in the obvious abuse occurring in his household, demonstrates his complete inadequacy as a father, even before he became an active monster. The crying child also represents something important in FNAF's themes: the vulnerability of children in the face of adult negligence and mechanical horror. He was afraid, and his fear was valid, and no one took it seriously until it was too late. His tears, which the fandom jokes about, but which are actually heartbreaking, weren't just fear of animatronics. They were the tears of a child who knew, on some instinctive level, that the adults in his life wouldn't protect him, that his brother would continue hurting him, that his father would continue monitoring but never actually intervening. He cried because he was right to be afraid. The promise, "I will put you back together," haunts the franchise because we still don't know if it was kept, or what it would even mean to put someone back together after such complete destruction. Can a soul be reassembled? Can a child's innocence be restored after such trauma? These are questions the games pose but never answer, leaving the crying child as an eternal mystery. A victim whose ultimate fate remains unknown, but whose impact on the story is undeniable. He was the crack in the Afton family foundation, the first tragedy that revealed how thoroughly broken they were, and nothing was ever the same after his death. Family dynamics and dysfunction. To understand the Afton family fully, we must examine not just the individual members, but the toxic dynamics that bound them together and ultimately tore them apart. This wasn't merely a dysfunctional family in the everyday sense of parents and children who didn't communicate well or who had normal conflicts. The Afton household represented a fundamental failure of every aspect of family functioning, creating an environment where tragedy wasn't just possible, but inevitable, where each member's worst traits fed off and amplified the others until disaster became the only possible outcome. At the head of this broken family stood William Afton, and his style of parenting, or rather his complete lack of meaningful parenting, set the tone for everything that followed. William practiced what we might call surveillance parenting, monitoring his children through hidden cameras in their plush toys, but never actually engaging with them as a present father. He knew what was happening in his house. He heard his youngest son crying, saw Michael's bullying, understood that his family was coming apart. Yet he did nothing to intervene, treating his children's suffering as data to be observed rather than problems requiring his attention and care. This creates a particularly disturbing subtext to William's character. He wasn't simply an absent father consumed by work who missed warning signs. He was actively watching the dysfunction unfold and chose not to intervene. When Michael locked his brother in rooms and tormented him with animatronic masks, William saw it happening through his surveillance, but made no effort to discipline Michael or protect his youngest son. When Elizabeth became obsessed with Circus Baby, William's response was a simple warning to stay away rather than proper supervision or explanation. He observed his family like he observed his experiments, with clinical detachment and no emotional investment in the outcomes. Mrs. Afton's removal from the family, whether through divorce, death, or some combination of both, created a power vacuum that William never filled. Children need structure, boundaries, and emotional support, all things William either couldn't or wouldn't provide. Michael was left to develop his own sense of morality without guidance, leading him to become a bully who didn't understand or care about the harm he was causing. The crying child was left to manage his terror alone, with only surveillance masquerading as care. Elizabeth sought attention and approval in all the wrong places, fixating on animatronics because they were the closest thing to her father's affection she could access. The sibling dynamics within the Afton household were equally toxic. Michael and the crying child represent one of the most dysfunctional sibling relationships in gaming, where systematic bullying and genuine terror replaced any hint of brotherly affection. But we have to ask why Michael behaved this way, and the answer likely lies in the same parental neglect that affected all the children. Michael was a teenager in a household where his mother was gone. His father was emotionally absent, and no one was teaching him how to process his own anger and confusion about the family's deterioration. Bullying often stems from a desire for power and control in someone who feels powerless in other areas of their life. Michael couldn't control his parents' dysfunction, couldn't make his father notice him or his mother return, couldn't fix whatever was clearly going wrong in the Afton household. But he could control his little brother's experience. He could make someone else feel small and afraid. It's a deeply problematic coping mechanism, and Michael's behavior was absolutely wrong. But understanding its roots helps us see how the family's dysfunction created the conditions for tragedy. Elizabeth's role in the family is harder to pin down because we see less of her interactions with other members. The pink bedroom glimpsed in FNAF 4 is often attributed to her, suggesting she had a more traditionally feminine space in a house otherwise dominated by masculine energy and mechanical horror. Her relationship with William seems to have been characterized by hero worship and desperate seeking of approval, seeing in her father's creations a reflection of his brilliance and wanting to be close to that genius. This might explain why she became so fixated on Circus Baby specifically, if she truly believed, as the dialogue suggests, that Baby was made specifically for her. But Elizabeth's devotion to William also reveals how little she understood about him. She saw an inventor and creator, a father who built marvelous things. She didn't see, or perhaps willfully ignored, the darker aspects of his character. When he warned her away from Circus Baby, she interpreted it as mere overprotectiveness rather than the serious danger it represented. This disconnect between how Elizabeth viewed her father and who William actually was set up the tragedy of her death. A child's innocent misunderstanding colliding with her father's homicidal mechanical designs. The family's British origins, confirmed by their accents when they speak, adds an interesting layer to their American setting. The Aftons appear to be British immigrants to Utah, possibly explaining some of their isolation from the community. William and Henry's partnership built Fazbear Entertainment from the ground up, suggesting they were outsiders building something new rather than inheriting an established business or family legacy. This immigrant status might have contributed to the family's insular nature, their tendency to keep problems private rather than seeking help from extended family or community resources that might not have existed for them. Communication within the Afton family was either absent or destructive. William communicated with his youngest son through a plush toy speaker rather than face-to-face conversations. Michael communicated with his brother through torment and pranks rather than actual sibling bonding. Elizabeth's pleas to see Circus Baby were met with warnings, but no real explanation. No one in this family talked to each other in any meaningful way. When the crying child was clearly terrified, no one sat him down to understand why or to help him process his fears. When Michael was acting out, No one addressed the underlying issues causing his behavior. When Elizabeth became obsessed with the animatronics, no one explored what emotional need that obsession was filling. The physical layout of the Afton home, as shown in FNAF 4, reinforces this dysfunction. The house is dark, with long corridors and separated rooms that allow family members to avoid each other. The crying child's room can be locked from the outside, a security feature that no child's bedroom should have, suggesting either William's paranoia about something or Michael's ability to trap his brother as punishment. The television plays Fredbear and Friends continuously, a constant reminder of William's business, even in their supposedly private domestic space. There's no evidence of family gathering areas, no suggestion of shared meals or family time, just isolated individuals moving through shared space without truly connecting. This isolation extended beyond the home. We never see the Afton children with friends outside of Michael's group of fellow bullies. The crying child has no one to confide in about his fears except his plush toys. Elizabeth apparently has no playmates who might have accompanied her to Circus Baby's pizza world, preventing her from being alone with the animatronic. Michael's friends seem to be enablers of his worst behaviors, rather than positive influences. The family existed in a bubble, cut off from normal social connections that might have provided reality checks or interventions. The intersection of William's business and family life created additional toxicity. Most parents try to keep work separate from home, but William's entire identity was bound up in animatronic entertainment. His children weren't just growing up around animatronics. They were growing up inside an animatronic-focused worldview where mechanical entertainment took precedence over human needs. Fredbear's family diner wasn't just their father's workplace. It was a place they were forced to attend for birthday parties and family events, making it impossible to escape the animatronics, even in moments that should have been about family rather than business. This created a situation where the children couldn't develop normal relationships with their father's creations. The animatronics weren't just entertainment. They were symbols of their father's priorities, of what he cared about more than them. The crying child's fear of the animatronics might have been partially about the mechanical creatures themselves, but also about what they represented. His father's focus, the thing that took William's attention away from his family, the business that mattered more than his children's emotional well-being. The family's dysfunction reached its peak in the events of 1983. Within what might have been just months or even weeks, 2 of William's 3 children died. The crying child was killed in a prank gone wrong at Fredbear's family diner, William's business, and the site of his partnership with Henry. Elizabeth died at Circus Baby's Pizza World, William's new venture, and a facility filled with his deadly creations. In both cases, the deaths occurred because of animatronics William had created or helped create, in locations he owned or managed, under circumstances where better parenting might have prevented tragedy. After these deaths, what remained of the Afton family fell apart completely. Michael was left alone with a father who was increasingly consumed by remnant experiments and a guilt that would define the rest of his existence. William, rather than seeking help or processing his grief, doubled down on his obsessions, using his remaining son to further his experiments and eventually sending Michael to what might have been a suicide mission at sister location. The family that had never been functional became not a family at all, but a series of individuals connected only by shared trauma and name. The Afton family dynamics ultimately proved that talent and intelligence, which William possessed in abundance, mean nothing without emotional maturity and genuine care for others. William was brilliant enough to create revolutionary animatronic technology and build a successful entertainment empire. But he was too emotionally stunted or simply too evil to love his children properly, to protect them from danger, or even to notice when they desperately needed help. The resulting family structure, if we can even call it that, guaranteed tragedy. The only surprise is that it took until 1983 for everything to completely collapse. Understanding these dynamics helps us make sense of why the Afton family became what it did. Not just victims of circumstance, but products of a fundamentally broken system where every member's needs went unmet, where love was expressed only through surveillance or obsession, where mechanical creations received more care and attention than human children. This was a family doomed not by fate, but by choices, by neglect, by the gradual accumulation of small failures that eventually led to catastrophic losses. And in the end, the only Afton who tried to break this cycle was Michael, the one who started as a bully, but ended as something approaching a hero, trying desperately to undo damage that could never truly be repaired. The timeline of tragedy, chronological events. To fully understand how the Afton family's story unfolded, we need to follow the timeline of key events, seeing how each tragedy built upon the last until the family's complete dissolution. This chronological examination reveals patterns of neglect, violence, and supernatural horror that transformed a dysfunctional family into the centerpiece of FNAF's darkest lore. The story begins in the 1970s, probably the mid to late 70s, when William Afton and Henry Emily met and formed their partnership. William, with his business acumen and interest in animatronic technology, and Henry, with his genuine robotics genius and desire to bring joy to children, seemed like a good match on paper. Together, they founded Fazbear Entertainment and established Fredbear's Family Diner, introducing the springlock suits of Fredbear and Spring Bonnie that would become both revolutionary and deadly. During this period, William married a woman whose name remains unknown, and together they had their first child, Michael. Probably born in the late 60s or very early 70s, based on his apparent age, in 1983. The business flourished. Fredbear's Family Diner became popular enough to spawn a television show, Fredbear and Friends, that aired in 1983. William and his unnamed wife had 2 more children. The crying child, born probably in the mid to late 70s, and Elizabeth, born in the late 70s or very early 80s. During these early years before tragedy struck, we can imagine the Afton family might have seemed almost normal from the outside. A successful businessman with a growing family and a thriving partnership with Henry Emily. But cracks were already showing. William's parenting style was characterized by absence and surveillance rather than genuine engagement. His obsessions with his work, with mechanical perfection, with the properties of the springlock suits and their potential applications, took precedence over his family. His wife, whether named Clara or something else, apparently became increasingly unhappy with the marriage. By the early 1980s, divorce proceedings had begun, and in a custody battle that would have far-reaching consequences, William manipulated his children into testifying against their mother, claiming she was unfit. He won custody, and Mrs. Afton disappeared from their lives, her fate unknown but likely tragic. 1983 stands as the family's first year of true catastrophe. This was when everything that had been building beneath the surface finally erupted into visible tragedy. The exact order of events within this year is somewhat debated, but certain facts remain clear. At some point, William Afton committed his first confirmed murder, killing Charlotte Emily outside Fredbear's family diner. Charlotte's possession of the security puppet that failed to save her introduced William to the phenomenon of remnant and supernatural possession, planting the seed for obsessions that would drive the rest of his evil actions. Around this same time, Michael's bullying of his younger brother reached its peak. For reasons we can only speculate about, possibly related to the stress of his parents' divorce and his father's increasing neglect, Michael tormented his younger brother relentlessly. He wore a foxy mask and jumped out to scare him. He locked him in rooms. He recruited friends to corner the boy at Fredbear's. All of this built to the fatal birthday party, where Michael and his friends lifted the crying child up to Fredbear's mouth. The spring lock failure crushed the boy's head, fatally damaging his frontal lobe. Days later, he died in the hospital, becoming the bite of 83 victim and possibly possessing Golden Freddy, though this remains debated. The death of the crying child had immediate and lasting consequences for the Afton family. Michael was left with guilt that would define the rest of his life. William, rather than addressing the family trauma properly, withdrew further into his work. The business partnership with Henry Emily grew strained, with the death of Henry's daughter Charlotte and the bite of 83 at Fredbear's, causing serious problems for the Fazbear Entertainment brand. Eventually, Fredbear's family diner was shut down, though Freddy Fazbear's pizza locations continued operating. In the years following the bite of 83, likely sometime in the mid to late 1980s based on the timeline of events, William established Circus Baby's Pizza World, a new venture that represented his growing obsession with using animatronics to kill children and harvest their remnant. He designed the Funtime animatronics with specific child-catching mechanisms, creating machines that could lure, grab, and store victims while maintaining a festive appearance. Circus Baby, designed with a claw in her stomach and ice cream dispenser to attract lone children, was supposed to be his masterpiece. But during a private testing event, Elizabeth Afton snuck into the facility and approached Baby, exactly what William had warned her not to do. Baby's programming activated. The claw grabbed Elizabeth. She died, and her spirit possessed the animatronic immediately. William's response to losing his second child was to hide the incident, fabricate a story about gas leaks, and shut down Circus Baby's Pizza World before it could open to the public. He moved the Funtime animatronics to an underground facility that would become Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals, treating his daughter's new form as property to be stored and controlled with electric shocks, rather than a child who needed help. This death, following so soon after his youngest sons, should have been a wake-up call about the dangers of his creations and his parenting failures, but William showed no signs of changing course. In 1985, William enacted the missing children incident, his most infamous crime spree. Using the Spring Bonnie suit to gain children's trust, he lured 5, possibly 6 children into the safe room at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and murdered them. He stuffed their bodies into the animatronic suits of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and Golden Freddy, where the puppet, possessed by Charlotte, helped them possess the machines. These murders were deliberate experiments in remnant and possession, William building on what he learned from Charlotte to create more vessels for children's souls. The location was eventually forced to close due to the smell and mysterious behavior of the animatronics, though William evaded justice for the murders. Throughout the mid to late 1980s, and into the early 90s. William continued his experiments with Remnant. At some point, he returned to the abandoned Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and attempted to dismantle the possessed animatronics to harvest their remnant. But the spirits fought back, cornering him in the safe room where he put on the Spring Bonnie suit for protection. The suit's spring locks failed, killing William, or at least transforming him into the undead creature known as Springtrap. The safe room was sealed, and William remained trapped there for the next 30 years while the building deteriorated around him. During this period, Michael Afton began his mission to find his father and stop him. At some point, possibly after receiving communication from William, Michael traveled to Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals under orders to free Elizabeth. Instead, he was used by the Funtime animatronics as an escape vehicle. They scooped out his insides, combined into Ennard, and wore his skin to reach the surface. When Michael's body began to decay, Ennard ejected themselves, but Michael impossibly survived, becoming an undead purple corpse animated by a remnant. His vow to find his father became his driving purpose. In 1993, Michael took a job at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza under the alias Mike Schmidt. He survived 7 nights being hunted by the possessed animatronics who mistook him for William, was fired for tampering with their AI and for the odor of his decaying body, but gained valuable information about his father's crimes and the spirits trapped in the machines. This job, rather than paying him, served Michael's larger goal of understanding and eventually stopping William's legacy of horror. Around 2023, 30 years after William's Springlock failure, Fazbear's Fright opened as a horror attraction. The developers found Springtrap in the sealed safe room and brought him to their facility, unknowingly giving William a way out of his decades-long imprisonment. Michael, likely the security guard at Fazbear's Fright, confronted his undead father, but fire consumed the building before any real resolution could occur. William survived, crawling from the wreckage still animate despite the flames. The final confrontation came at Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, when Henry Emily orchestrated an elaborate trap. Michael served as manager, drawing in the remaining possessed animatronics: Scrap Baby, containing Elizabeth; Molten Freddy, containing remnants of the missing children; Lefty, containing Charlotte in the puppet; and Scrap Trap, William's latest form. Henry's speech acknowledged each of them before activating the incinerator, burning hot enough to destroy the remnant and free the souls. Michael chose to stay and burn alongside his family, ending the Afton line's physical presence in the world. But even this wasn't the complete end. William's essence, or something mimicking it, emerged as Glitchtrap in the Help Wanted virtual reality game when Fazbear Entertainment scanned old circuit boards. This digital ghost possessed people through the game, continuing William's legacy of manipulation and control. In Security Breach, he appeared again as Burntrap, his body somehow reconstructed in the ruins beneath the Pizzaplex, before being pulled back by the Blob. Whether William Afton will ever truly be ended remains an open question in the FNAF timeline. This chronological view shows us how the Afton family's tragedy wasn't a single event, but a cascade, each horror building on the last, creating momentum that became impossible to stop. The divorce removed the children's mother from their lives. The bullying, enabled by William's neglect, led to the crying child's death. That death intensified the family dysfunction. Elizabeth's death followed, the result of William's deadly creations meeting inadequate supervision. William's murders and experiments created more possessed animatronics and brought down more tragedy. Michael's attempts at redemption, while noble, came too late to save anyone, including himself. The timeline reveals patterns in William's behavior, an escalation from neglectful father to murderer to experimenter to monster, each step making the next more likely and more destructive. It shows Michael's parallel journey from bully to victim to undead hero, his character arc spanning decades as he tried to undo what his family had created. It demonstrates how the supernatural elements of possession and remnant became intertwined with the family's human failures, creating a legacy that outlasted even death. Looking at these events in sequence makes one thing abundantly clear. The Afton family's tragedy was preventable at numerous points. Better parenting could have saved the crying child. Proper supervision could have saved Elizabeth. Different business choices could have prevented the missing children murders. The horror that unfolded wasn't fate or bad luck. It was the natural consequence of William Afton's choices, enabled by a family structure too broken to stop him and a business partner who didn't recognize the warning signs until it was far too late. The timeline is less a story of inevitable tragedy and more a catalogue of missed opportunities to choose differently, to break the cycle before it became unstoppable. Possessions and afterlives. The Afton family's story doesn't end with death, because in the Five Nights at Freddy's universe, death is rarely final. Each member of the family who died found their consciousness continuing in some form, bound to the material world through the supernatural properties of remnant, through sheer force of will, or through circumstances we still don't fully understand. Understanding what happened to the Aftons after death is crucial to understanding their complete story and their lasting impact on their FNAF universe. The crying child's afterlife remains the most debated and mysterious. When he died in the hospital after the bite of 83, the Fredbear plush promised, "I will put you back together." But what this meant and whether it was fulfilled has generated endless theories. The most popular theory suggests he possessed Golden Freddy, either alone or sharing the animatronic with Cassidy, one of William's murder victims. The evidence includes the Happiest Day minigame, where a child matching the crying child's appearance and shirt receives a birthday party from the other missing children, suggesting he was finally given the peace he deserved and released from his possession. If the crying child did possess Golden Freddy, it would explain several of the animatronic's unique characteristics. Golden Freddy appears and disappears without physical movement, suggesting a supernatural rather than mechanical presence. He seems to have awareness and purpose beyond the confused aggression shown by the other possessed animatronics. His appearances are often tied to moments of significance in the story, suggesting an intelligence guiding his manifestations. And the parallels between the child's situation, tormented by his brother and killed in a prank, and Golden Freddy's behavior, targeting night guards who might be mistaken for William or Michael, create thematic connections that suggest more than coincidence. However, other theories exist. Some suggest the crying child became Shadow Freddy, the dark apparition that appears throughout the series and leads the animatronics in FNAF 3. This would explain Shadow Freddy's focus on William and his apparent desire to help the spirits take revenge. Others theorize the child's consciousness was somehow merged with Michael's, explaining Michael's nightmares about the animatronics and his apparent ability to communicate with his dead brother in the survival logbook. A darker possibility is that the child simply died and was never brought back together, that the Fredbear plush's promise was empty or couldn't be fulfilled, leaving him as a truly dead member of the family, whose spirit doesn't persist. Elizabeth Afton's possession of Circus Baby is more straightforward and confirmed. When Baby's claw grabbed Elizabeth, killing her and storing her body inside the animatronic, Elizabeth's spirit immediately possessed the machine. This wasn't like the missing children who were killed, stuffed into suits, and then awakened as possessors later. Elizabeth became Baby in the moment of death, her consciousness merging with the advanced AI William had programmed into the animatronic. This created a hybrid entity where Baby's programming and Elizabeth's soul existed together, neither fully in control, but both influencing behavior. Baby's possession showed unusual characteristics because of this immediate merger. Unlike the confused, aggressive spirits in the original animatronics, who barely remembered being human, Baby maintained intelligence and self-awareness. She could communicate clearly, form complex plans like the creation of a nod, and manipulate situations to achieve goals. But she also retained Baby's programming, including directives to count children and activate child-catching protocols, creating an unsettling blend where Elizabeth's innocence mixed with machinery designed to kill. After ejection from Enard and her reconstruction as Scrap Baby, Elizabeth's character seemed to darken further. Whether this was corruption from years of isolation and merging with homicidal AI, or simply Elizabeth adopting what she thought would please her father. Scrap Baby spoke about wanting to make William proud by killing children, suggesting the girl who just wanted ice cream and balloons had been completely subsumed by something darker. Her destruction in the pizzeria simulator fire presumably freed her soul, allowing her to finally move beyond the anger and confusion of her possessed state. William Afton's afterlife is the longest and most complex, transforming through multiple forms as he repeatedly escaped destruction. When the spring locks failed and impaled him in the spring Bonnie suit, William should have died. The mechanisms pierced his organs, crushed his bones, and left him bleeding out in a sealed room. But somehow, William survived in an undead state, becoming Springtrap, a fusion of rotting corpse and decaying animatronic that remained conscious and mobile for 30 years of isolation. Springtrap wasn't simply William's body animating a suit. It was a genuine merger where the man and machine became one entity. William's organs were visible through gaps in the suit, his mummified flesh pressed against the animatronic components, his consciousness trapped in an existence that must have been constant agony, yet somehow bearable enough that he continued choosing to persist rather than allowing death to finally claim him. The remnant he had studied and injected into other animatronics apparently kept him alive through properties he might not have fully understood, granting the immortality he sought, but in a form that was more curse than blessing. After the Fazbear's fright fire, William emerged as Scraptrap, more damaged but still animate. His suit was more deteriorated, exposing more of his corpse beneath. But he continued moving and apparently continued seeking out new victims, or attempting to achieve whatever goals still motivated him. The pizzeria simulator fire, specifically designed by Henry to destroy Remnant by raising temperatures high enough to break the supernatural bonds, should have been William's final end. The intense heat melted the metal infused with souls, freeing most of the spirits to whatever afterlife awaited them. But William Afton's consciousness, or an echo of it, persisted in an unexpected way. When Fazbear Entertainment developed Help Wanted, they scanned old circuit boards from the original animatronics to use in programming. These boards contained remnant, including fragments of a William's essence or memories. This scanning process created Glitchtrap, a digital ghost taking the form of a rabbit that could exist in virtual space and possess people through the game. Glitchtrap retained William's intelligence and malevolence, manipulating Vanessa into becoming Vanny and continuing the cycle of control and murder in a new medium. In Security Breach, William apparently reconstructed a physical form as Burntrap, his corpse somehow rebuilt with animatronic parts and waiting in the ruins beneath the Pizzaplex. This form was attacked by the Blob, an amalgamation of possessed parts, and pulled back into the depths, suggesting that even after all this time, the spirits William wronged still sought to prevent his escape, or perhaps to ensure he suffered eternally. Whether Burntrap represented the William's actual consciousness, or just another echo, remains unclear, as does whether the Blob's attack truly destroyed him, or simply prevented his latest resurrection. Michael Afton's afterlife might be the strangest, because unlike his siblings, Michael wasn't possessing an animatronic. He was an animated corpse. His own body kept moving by remnant after being scooped and used by Ennard. When Ennard ejected themselves, Michael should have been an empty husk, dead flesh that would rapidly decay. But instead, he got up. His body purpled as decay set in. His skin took on an unnatural hue. His organs were missing, yet he walked and talked and continued functioning like a living person, if a very strange-looking one. Michael existed in a liminal state between life and death for decades. He could take jobs, write in logbooks, apply for positions at various Freddy locations, and presumably interact with society despite his deteriorating appearance. How he managed this remains unexplained. Some theories suggest he used disguises or illusion discs from the novel trilogy. Others propose that remnants simply animated him strongly enough that he could maintain a facade of life. Whatever the mechanism, Michael persisted as an undead being driven by his mission to find and stop his father. His final rest came in the pizzeria simulator fire, where he chose to burn alongside the other animatronics. Unlike William, Michael wasn't trying to escape. He wasn't clinging to existence beyond death. He was accepting his end, allowing himself to finally die after decades of unnatural life. The gravestone showing his name in the Lawkeeper ending suggests he found peace in this choice, that his sacrifice in staying to ensure the fire succeeded earned him a place among those who deserved rest, rather than among the perpetrators who deserved punishment. The existence of afterlives and possessions within the Afton family raises philosophical questions about identity and continuity. When Elizabeth possessed Baby, was she still Elizabeth, or was she something new created by the merger of human soul and machine intelligence? When William became Springtrap and then Scraptrap and then Glitchtrap and then Burntrap, was it still William Afton, or just echoes and fragments of what he had been? When Michael walked around as an animated corpse, was he truly alive in any meaningful sense, or just a ghost haunting his own body? These questions don't have clear answers, which may be intentional on Scott Cawthon's part. The ambiguity about what persists after death, about what makes someone who they are when their body and consciousness become separated or mixed with other elements, reflects larger philosophical debates about personal identity and the nature of consciousness. The Afton family becomes a case study in these questions, each member experiencing a different form of death and afterlife that challenges our understanding of what it means to exist. What's clear is that for the Afton family, death solved nothing. It didn't end their stories or release them from the consequences of their actions and the actions done to them. Instead, death became another chapter, a transformation rather than an ending. The crying child might have found peace eventually in the happiest day, But first, he likely spent years confused and afraid, possessing an animatronic and unable to understand what had happened to him. Elizabeth spent decades merged with killer machinery, her childhood innocence slowly consumed by isolation and programming. William embraced his undead state, using it to continue his crimes across multiple forms and mediums. Michael alone seemed to find purpose in his afterlife, using his impossible existence to pursue redemption. The supernatural persistence of the Afton family reflects one of FNAF's core themes. Actions have consequences that outlast our natural lifespans, and some sins create ripples that continue long after the sinner themselves should have been silenced by a death. William's murders didn't just end 6 or more lives. They created possessions that spawned more tragedies, that created more possessions in an ever-widening circle of supernatural horror. His neglect of his children didn't just hurt them in life. It set up conditions where their deaths would trap them in animatronic shells, extending their suffering indefinitely. Even his attempt at immortality backfired, granting him eternal existence, but in forms he couldn't have predicted or wanted, trapped in decaying suits and digital prisons, rather than achieving the godlike transcendence he apparently sought. The Afton family's afterlives prove that in the FNAF universe, death is negotiable but rarely merciful. Most who die trapped in the machines don't find peace quickly. They spend years confused, angry, violent, trapped in metal shells that barely allow them to express their suffering or communicate their needs. The few who find release, like the children in The Happiest Day, and possibly the Aftons themselves in the pizzeria simulator fire, only reach that peace after prolonged torment, and usually only after someone, often Henry Emily or Michael Afton, actively works to free them. This creates a universe where the Afton family's legacy extends far beyond their natural lives, where a family's dysfunction and crimes become literally eternal without intervention, where the innocent and the guilty alike suffer supernatural punishments that make their earthly trials seem merciful by comparison. Understanding the Aftons' afterlives helps us understand why Michael's mission to end it all was so important, and why Henry's final trap was necessary. The possessions needed to be ended, not just to stop the immediate threats, but to free the family members themselves from existences that should never have been possible, granting them the peace that death should have provided initially, but which remnant and circumstance denied them for decades. The legacy and impact on FNAF. The Afton family's impact on Five Nights at Freddy's extends far beyond their own tragic story. They are the foundation upon which the entire franchise is built, the family whose dysfunction and crimes created the conditions for every haunted animatronic, every possessed restaurant, every supernatural horror that players encounter throughout the games. Understanding the Aftons is essential to understanding FNAF itself, because without this family's particular blend of brilliance and evil, of neglect and obsession, of human weakness and mechanical horror, there would be no story to tell. William Afton's role as the primary antagonist makes him the engine driving almost every major event in the franchise. His partnership with Henry Emily created Fazbear Entertainment, establishing the animatronic entertainment industry that serves as the setting for the games. His murder of Charlotte Emily awakened the possibility of remnant and possession, demonstrating that children's spirits could inhabit animatronics and continue existing after death. His missing children incident populated the original animatronics with the spirits that terrorized night guards in the first game, creating the core gameplay loop of surviving against possessed machines. His creation of the fun-time animatronics with their child-catching mechanisms showed how far William would go in weaponizing entertainment, designing machines specifically to enable murder under the guise of joy and celebration. His experiments with Remnant pushed the boundaries of what was possible in the FNAF universe, discovering ways to inject souls into animatronics, to harvest that supernatural essence, to potentially achieve immortality through possession. Without William's crimes and discoveries, the franchise would lack its central horror, the knowledge that the animatronics are not just machines, but tombs for murdered children seeking revenge. The impact of William's specific methodology ripples through the franchise in unexpected ways. His use of the spring Bonnie suit to lure children created a terrifying precedent of predators hiding behind friendly mascot costumes, turning symbols of childhood joy into markers of danger. His safe room murders showed how easily children could be isolated and harmed, even in supposedly supervised public spaces, tapping into real parental fears about their children's safety. His continued persistence after death, surviving fire and springlock failures and multiple destructions, creates an atmosphere where evil seems unkillable, where the monster always comes back no matter how many times heroes try to stop him. Michael Afton's redemption arc provides the franchise's emotional core and its closest thing to a traditional protagonist. While many FNAF games feature unnamed night guards or voiceless protagonists, Michael's story spans multiple games and gives context to the player's actions. When we're surviving at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza as Mike Schmidt, we're experiencing Michael's guilt-driven investigation. When we're working at Sister Location, we're participating in Michael's manipulation by his father and his transformation into an undead being. When we're managing Pizzeria Simulator, we're helping Michael finally confront and end his family's legacy. Michael's presence in multiple games provides narrative continuity that would otherwise be absent in a series known for its fragmented storytelling. He connects disparate locations and time periods, showing us how the horrors are related and giving us a through-line character whose motivations we can understand and potentially sympathize with despite his early actions. His transformation from bully to reluctant hero demonstrates that redemption is possible even after terrible mistakes, offering a counterpoint to his father's complete irredeemability and suggesting that the Afton name doesn't have to mean evil. Elizabeth Afton's possession of Circus Baby and later Scrap Baby provides one of the franchise's most tragic villains. Unlike the original missing children, who were innocent victims murdered by a stranger, Elizabeth was killed by her own father's creation, a machine he designed specifically to kill children. This adds layers of betrayal and irony to her possession. She becomes not just a vengeful spirit, but a daughter still seeking her father's approval even in death, willing to continue his work if it means finally earning his love. This psychological complexity makes Baby Itchy Elizabeth more than just another animatronic threat. Elizabeth's story also demonstrates how William's evil corrupted even those closest to him. She started as an innocent girl who loved her father and his creations, and ended as Scrap Baby, promising to make Daddy proud by murdering children. This corruption, this transformation of love and admiration into something monstrous, shows the deeper horror of William's influence. He didn't just kill children. He destroyed the innocence and potential of his own daughter, turning her into a reflection of his own cruelty through years of isolation and the merger of her consciousness with homicidal programming. The crying child, despite his unclear fate and unnamed status, impacts the franchise through the mystery surrounding him and through the guilt his death instills in Michael. The Bite of 83 serves as a pivotal moment that changes the Afton family forever, transforming Michael from a thoughtless bully into someone consumed by remorse. Whether the crying child possesses Golden Freddy, Shadow Freddy, or some other entity, his presence lurks in the background of multiple games, a victim whose peace was denied and whose fate remains unresolved. The child's fear of animatronics, so central to FNAF 4's gameplay, might represent the franchise's purest distillation of its horror. A small child terrified of mechanical entertainers that come alive at night, unable to escape or find help, forced to endure nightmare after nightmare, captures what makes FNAF scary. The crying child's tears and terror remind us that these aren't just robots or games, but representations of real childhood fears, of things that should be safe becoming dangerous, of places that should be joyful becoming sites of trauma. Mrs. Afton, despite her absence and unclear fate, impacts the story through what she represents. The possibility of a different outcome if someone had been there to intervene. Her removal from the family, whether through death or divorce, left a vacuum that allowed tragedy to flourish unchecked. Her mystery also engages the fandom in ways that confirmed backstories don't, encouraging theories, debates, and creative interpretations that keep people invested in the lore. The question of whether she possesses Ballora, of what her real name might be, of what became of her, generates discussion that extends the franchise's life and reach. The family's British background adds an interesting international dimension to what could have been a purely American horror story. The accents when they speak, the implied immigrant status, gives them an outsider quality that may contribute to their isolation and their ability to operate outside community oversight. It also makes the Aftons more than just any dysfunctional family. It makes them specifically this family with these specific characteristics, grounding them as particular individuals rather than generic archetypes. The Afton family's criminal and supernatural legacy directly enables almost every game's events. Freddy Fazbear's pizza locations are haunted because of William's murders. Sister Location exists because of William's experiments and Elizabeth's death. Fazbear's Fright features Springtrap, William's undead form. Pizzeria Simulator serves as the trap to end the Afton's persistence. Help Wanted and Security Breach deal with digital and physical echoes of William's consciousness. Without the Afton family's actions and fates, none of these locations or threats would exist. The family also influences other characters' decisions and fates throughout the franchise. Henry Emily's entire character arc is defined by his relationship with William and his response to William's betrayal and murders, culminating in Henry's sacrifice to end the possessed animatronics. Charlotte Emily's death at William's hands and her possession of the puppet drive her to help the other murdered children, making her a protector spirit whose actions shape multiple games. The missing children's confusion about Mike Schmidt's identity, mistaking him for William, shows how the Afton's similar appearances cause problems that ripple through the timeline. Even characters in newer games connect to the Afton legacy. Vanessa in Security Breach might be William's daughter, or influenced by Glitchtrap's possession, continuing the pattern of William's manipulation reaching across generations. Gregory, whether connected to the crying child or not, deals with the consequences of William's creations in the Pizzaplex. The blob that attacks Burntrap consists of parts from animatronics the Afton family encountered or created, suggesting that even the newer forms of horror trace back to their actions. The Aftons establish several recurring patterns and themes that define FNAF storytelling. The idea of children murdered and possessing animatronics comes directly from William's crimes. The concept of family tragedy driving supernatural horror stems from the Afton family's dysfunction. The persistent villain, who always returns, draws from William's multiple forms and apparent unkillability. The redemption arc of a flawed protagonist traces to Michael's journey. These elements, all rooted in the Afton family's story, became the building blocks for how FNAF tells stories across multiple games and media. Their legacy also extends to the fandom itself. Theories about Afton family members, their fates, their identities, and their actions make up a huge portion of FNAF theory crafting. Debates about who the crying child became, whether Mrs. Afton is Ballora, whether Michael or William is in which animatronic, whether Vanessa is an Afton. These discussions keep the community engaged between game releases and create a collaborative storytelling experience where fans try to piece together mysteries the games deliberately leave ambiguous. Fan content featuring the Afton family, from animations to comics to written stories, often focuses on humanizing these characters, showing the family in better times, or exploring alternate timelines where tragedy is averted. This creative response to the Aftons' canonical tragedy demonstrates how resonant their story is, how fans connect with even characters as flawed as William, or as damaged as Michael, finding ways to imagine versions of these people who didn't become monsters or victims. The Afton family proves that FNAF is more than just a series of horror games about surviving animatronic attacks. It's a generational tragedy about a family that fell apart, about children failed by the adults who should have protected them, about obsession consuming everything it touches, and about how the sins of one person can echo through time, affecting people decades after the original crimes. Understanding the Aftons transforms FNAF from a collection of jump scares and survival scenarios into a cohesive narrative with emotional stakes and thematic depth. In the end, the Afton family's legacy is both the horror they created and the warning they represent. They show us what happens when family fails, when obsession replaces empathy, when brilliance is divorced from morality. They demonstrate that evil doesn't require complex motivations or tragic backstories. Sometimes it just requires someone choosing wrong repeatedly. And they prove that even in a universe as dark as Five Nights at Freddy's, redemption is possible, peace can be found, and families, even the most broken ones, can finally rest if someone cares enough to help them end their suffering. Unresolved mysteries and theories. Despite decades of games, books, and extensive community analysis, the Afton family continues to harbor mysteries that may never be fully resolved. These lingering questions fuel ongoing debates, spawn new theories with each game release, and keep the fandom engaged in ways that complete answers never could. Understanding what we don't know about the Aftons is as important as understanding what we do know, because these mysteries shape how we interpret the family story and impact how we engage with FNAF lore as a whole. The most persistent mystery remains the crying child's true name. Fans have theorized everything from Evan to Chris to Norman to CC, but no official confirmation has ever come. The survival logbook seemed to offer clues through ciphers and puzzles that might spell out a name, but interpretations vary, and none have achieved universal acceptance. Some believe Scott Cawthon deliberately left this child nameless as a narrative choice, making him an every child whose tragedy could represent any victim of family dysfunction. Others think the name exists in the lore, but is so well hidden that the community hasn't definitively cracked the puzzle. This mystery extends to what the crying child became after death. While Golden Freddy remains the most popular theory, with the Happiest Day minigame providing strong evidence, alternative theories persist. The Shadow Freddy theory has its adherents, pointing to the dark figure's behavior in FNAF 3 and its apparent connection to William. Some theorists believe the child's consciousness somehow merged with Michael, explaining Michael's nightmares and his ability to survive as an undead being. A faction argues that the child simply died and stayed dead, that "I will put you back together" failed, or meant something metaphorical rather than literal. Without explicit confirmation, each theory remains viable, and new games sometimes introduce evidence that supports or contradicts different interpretations. Mrs. Afton's entire existence remains shrouded in mystery. Her name, if Clara is even correct, comes from tenuous evidence in a television show that might just be coincidental. Her fate after losing custody of her children is completely unknown, with theories ranging from suicide to accidental death, to still being alive somewhere. Whether she possessed any animatronic, particularly Ballora, has never been confirmed despite the popularity of this theory. We don't know her hair color for certain, her personality, her relationship with her children beyond basic motherhood, or even if she attempted to maintain contact after the divorce. The mystery of Mrs. Afton serves an interesting narrative purpose. Her absence creates a hole in the family structure that helps explain the dysfunction, while her unknown fate allows fans to project their own interpretations onto her character. She can be a tragic victim in some headcanons, a negligent parent in others, or even a co-conspirator in William's early crimes in the darkest theories. The game's refusal to define her leaves space for the community to fill in the gaps with theories that reveal as much about the theorist's values and assumptions as they do about potential lore. Elizabeth Afton's age relative to her brothers has never been precisely established. Was she younger than the crying child, making her the true youngest sibling, or was she older, possibly closer in age to Michael? The Fazbear Fright story Lonely Freddy suggests she might have been the youngest, but the pink room in the FNAF 4 house implies she was alive during the crying child's death in '83, which would make her older if she wasn't born until after his death. This seemingly minor detail actually matters for understanding family dynamics, the order of tragedies, and whether William and Mrs. Afton's marriage was already over when Elizabeth was born. The question of Michael's true identity caused years of debate that seemingly was resolved by the week before novel confirming him as the older brother. But some theorists remain unconvinced, clinging to alternative interpretations, or suggesting the novel might represent a different continuity. The Mike victim versus Mike bro debate consumed the fandom for years, with each side presenting evidence from voice lines, sprite similarities, logbook puzzles, and thematic analysis. While Mike bro is now generally accepted as canon, the intensity of the historical debate shows how deeply fans invest in these mysteries. Whether Michael is actually Mike Schmidt, or if Mike Schmidt is a separate character using an alias that Michael later adopted, remains technically unresolved, though most fans accept they're the same person. The survival logbook strongly suggests this connection through references that only Michael from Sister Location would understand. But the games never explicitly state Mike Schmidt is Michael Afton, in a way that closes all debate. This allows for the possibility, however slim, that Mike Schmidt was a real person whose identity Michael assumed, adding another layer of deception to his quest to hide his connection to William. William Afton's ultimate fate after the events of Security Breach remains unclear. Was Springtrap truly William, or just another echo of his consciousness, similar to Glitchtrap? When the blob dragged him back into the ruins, was this William's final end, or just another temporary setback? Is William's consciousness still out there in digital form, waiting to manifest in future games? Or has he finally been destroyed permanently? The franchise has brought William back so many times that even apparently definitive endings become suspect, leaving fans wondering if we'll ever truly be rid of him, or if he'll continue haunting the series indefinitely. The extent of William's knowledge about his children's fates and his emotional response to them, if any, remains mysterious. Did William know Michael survived the scooping and became undead? If so, why didn't he try to recapture or help him? Did William recognize Michael in Pizzeria Simulator before the fire? What did William actually feel when Elizabeth died in Circus Baby's claw, if anything at all? The games show us William's actions, but rarely his inner thoughts or genuine emotions, leaving his psychology somewhat opaque despite his centrality to the story. Whether William built Circus Baby specifically for Elizabeth, as she believed, or if Baby was just another child-killing machine that Elizabeth mistakenly thought was made for her, has implications for understanding William's relationship with his daughter. If he did build Baby for Elizabeth, it suggests a twisted form of paternal affection, creating something beautiful for his daughter while making it deadly to all children. If Baby wasn't specifically for Elizabeth and she just misunderstood, it emphasizes William's neglect and his daughter's desperate desire for his attention. The dialogue suggests Elizabeth believed Baby was made for her, but whether William intended this remains ambiguous. The nature of Remnant itself, central to the Afton family's supernatural persistence, has never been fully explained. How does it work exactly? Why do children's souls bind to animatronics more effectively than adults? Can Remnant be created deliberately, or does it only form through specific tragic circumstances? How much consciousness and identity persists when souls are melted into Remnant and injected into new vessels? These questions affect how we understand every possession in the franchise, including all the Afton family possessions, yet they remain largely unanswered beyond vague descriptions of the substance's properties. Glitchtrap's exact relationship to William Afton sparks ongoing debate. Is Glitchtrap actually William's consciousness uploaded or recreated in digital form? Or is it more like an AI based on William's memories and personality scraped from Remnant-tainted circuit boards? This distinction matters for understanding whether William truly achieved a form of immortality through digital means, or if Glitchtrap is more like a copy, a simulation of William that believes itself to be the real thing, but lacks continuity with the original consciousness. The game leaves this deliberately vague, allowing both interpretations. Whether Vanessa in Security Breach is actually an Afton, specifically William's daughter or some other relation, has never been confirmed despite fan theories and apparent parallels in her backstory to the Afton family dynamics. The movie made Vanessa into William's daughter, but the game's version might be entirely separate, simply someone unlucky enough to be possessed or manipulated by Glitchtrap. Her last name, Shelley versus potentially Afton, and her relationship to Vanny, whether they're the same person with a split personality or separate entities, adds more layers to an already complex mystery. The identity of the sixth missing children victim, if one exists, has never been confirmed. 5 children are clearly established: Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy. But some evidence suggests a sixth victim, from Balloon Boy's collection of hats to Into the Pit's depiction of 6 bodies. If a sixth child existed, who were they, and what animatronic did they possess? Or is the sixth victim actually the crying child, killed by William's negligent enabling of the bite of 83, even if William didn't commit the murder directly? The survival logbook contains puzzles and Easter eggs that fans believe spell out messages from spirits, possibly the crying child communicating with Michael or Cassidy asking questions. But the solutions to these puzzles remain disputed, with different solving methods yielding different results. What the logbook is trying to tell us, if it's telling us anything beyond atmospheric details, could reveal crucial information about the Afton family, but only if we can crack the codes definitively. These mysteries and theories serve multiple purposes in the FNAF franchise. They keep the community engaged between releases, encouraging discussion and creative interpretation. They allow for multiple valid readings of the story, where different fans can hold different theories and support them with evidence, creating a collaborative storytelling experience. They leave space for future games to reveal new information that recontextualizes old events, keeping the lore dynamic rather than static. And they acknowledge that some things, particularly around the Afton family's private moments and internal experiences, might be deliberately unknowable, preserving the horror of uncertainty. What's clear is that even after years of analysis, the Afton family retains mysteries that may never be fully solved, at least not to the satisfaction of every theorist. These lingering questions don't diminish the family's story. Instead, they enrich it, creating space for imagination and interpretation that complements the confirmed facts. The Aftons are as much defined by what we don't know about them as by what we do. Their mysteries as much a part of their legacy as their confirmed crimes and tragedies. Conclusion. A family's dark echo. As we emerge from this comprehensive examination of the Afton family, we're left with a portrait of dysfunction so complete, of tragedy so layered, that it's difficult to imagine a fictional family more thoroughly destroyed by their own choices and circumstances. From William's transformation from businessman to serial killer to supernatural monster, to Mrs. Afton's mysterious disappearance from the narrative, to Michael's journey from bully to undead redeemer, to Elizabeth's corruption from innocent girl to mechanical horror, to the crying child's tear-streaked terror and ambiguous fate. Every member of this family suffered and caused suffering in ways that rippled through decades of FNAF lore. The Afton family tree is less a family and more a case study in how not to be human, how not to parent, how not to love. It shows us that brilliance without empathy creates horror, that surveillance without genuine care breeds tragedy, that children need more than basic provision to thrive. William Afton could design revolutionary animatronics, but couldn't design a functional family structure. He could discover remnant and unlock secrets of possession, but couldn't unlock genuine connection with his children. He built an empire of entertainment, while his home crumbled into isolation and abuse. Yet even in this darkness, moments of humanity persist. Michael's guilt-driven quest for redemption shows that awareness of one's sins can motivate change, even if that change comes too late to prevent tragedy. Elizabeth's love for her father, misguided and ultimately destructive as it was, represents genuine childlike devotion that deserved better than the fate she received. The crying child's fear, so often mocked by fans calling him names, was the natural response of a vulnerable child to a genuinely dangerous environment where adults failed to protect him and siblings actively harmed him. Mrs. Afton, despite her absence and mystery, represents the possibility that someone in this family once tried to be better, tried to provide actual care, tried to prevent the horrors that would unfold. Her removal, whether through death or forced separation, took away the family's last chance at any kind of healthy functioning, proving that sometimes one person can be the difference between a troubled family and a complete catastrophe. The supernatural elements of the Afton family's story, the possessions and remnant and digital ghosts and undead corpses, shouldn't distract from the very human horror at the story's core. These aren't just spooky game mechanics. They're consequences of real choices, real neglect, real evil. William didn't stumble into becoming a killer. He chose it repeatedly, prioritizing his obsessions over his children's lives and the lives of strangers' children. Michael didn't accidentally become a bully. He chose to torment his brother, making deliberate decisions to escalate pranks until they turned fatal. Elizabeth's tragedy stems from her father's choice to build deadly machines and then inadequately secure them. The Afton family's impact on Five Nights at Freddy's cannot be overstated. They are the franchise's black heart, the poison from which all other horrors flow. Without William's murders, no possessed animatronics. Without the family's dysfunction, no Bite of 83. Without Michael's quest for redemption, no protagonist threading through multiple games. Without Elizabeth's possession, no Sister Locations horror. Without the crying child's mystery, fewer fan theories and less community engagement. The Aftons made FNAF what it is, for better and worse. Looking at this family in total, we see patterns that repeat in real life, even without the supernatural elements. Neglectful parents produce damaged children. Systematic bullying causes lasting trauma. Children seek approval from unworthy authority figures. Family secrets fester until they explode into tragedy. The Aftons aren't just a horror story. They're a cautionary tale about what happens when family becomes toxic, when love is conditional or absent, when children are treated as inconveniences or tools, rather than people deserving of care and protection. The question of whether any Afton found peace in death remains somewhat open. The Happiest Day suggests some spirits, possibly including the crying child, received closure. The pizzeria simulator fire freed Elizabeth and the other missing children from their animatronic prisons. Michael chose his death knowing it would end his family's legacy. But William seems to persist in some form, his consciousness or echoes of it continuing to haunt the franchise through Glitch Trap and Burn Trap, suggesting that some evils don't rest easily, even when their physical forms are destroyed. Perhaps this is fitting. The Afton family's story doesn't provide neat closure or simple morals. It doesn't say that redemption erases sin, or that family love conquers all. Instead, it presents a messy, uncomfortable truth. Some families are broken beyond repair. Some people choose evil despite every opportunity to choose differently. And some tragedies echo long after the original participants are gone. The Afton name became synonymous with horror, not because of fate or bad luck, but because of choices, because of neglect, because of one man's ambitions consuming everything around him, like a fire that couldn't be extinguished. As we close this examination of the Afton family tree, we're left with an understanding of why this family captured the FNAF community's imagination so completely. They're not just villains and victims. They're a tragedy in the classical sense. Characters whose flaws and circumstances combine to produce inevitable disaster. They're human enough to be relatable. Their dysfunctions recognizable even in exaggerated form, yet strange enough with their supernatural persistence to maintain the horror that makes FNAF compelling. The Afton legacy continues in every new FNAF game, in every theory video dissecting their actions, in every piece of fan content exploring their relationships and reimagining their fates. They've become larger than any individual game. A mythology unto themselves that has taken on a life beyond what their creator might have initially envisioned. The questions they raise about family, evil, redemption, and the nature of persistence after death will continue fueling discussions long after their specific story concludes. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the Afton family tree. If you enjoyed this comprehensive exploration, please like and subscribe to Night Mode Lore for more FNAF deep dives designed to inform and soothe as you drift towards sleep. Let me know in the comments which Afton family member fascinates you most, what theories you find most compelling, and what other FNAF topics you'd like to see explored in this format. Until next time, rest well in the knowledge that, unlike the Aftons, your family story doesn't have to end in tragedy and possession. The Aftons remind us what to avoid, how not to be, and why family matters too much to treat carelessly. Sleep well, and remember, in the world of Five Nights at Freddy's, some families cast shadows that never quite fade, but understanding those shadows helps us appreciate the light in our own lives. Good night.